The sound of a can being opened triggers something in our brain. Oh. And over the years, the aluminum can has gone from just a simple vessel to hold your beverage to a symbol of progressive business practices and a brand's commitment to saving the planet. But the truth about these cans is just a little bit more complicated than that. A huge thank you to our Patreon community for making this video possible. Aluminum cans are having a moment right now. This infinitely recyclable, convenient, affordable technology has been around since the 60s, but has just recently been platformed in a whole new way. Yeah, the pinky is the way to go. Many brands today are peddling aluminum as the hero that we need to save our oceans from the plastic apocalypse. Or that's what Aquaman wants you to think. Yes, Aquaman. Jason Momoa launched a canned water company in 2019 as an alternative to plastic bottled water. He introduced the Hawaiian-themed Mananalu? He introduced the Hawaii-themed Mananalu pure water to the world in a promo video where he cut his legendary hair to bring attention to ocean plastic while touting his own company as the solution. Jason's goal is admirable, saving two different things from danger with one aluminum can or whatever, but Jason Momoa isn't the only one selling this particular narrative. Former Karate Kid Jaden Smith has also founded an eco-friendly water company called Just Water. Yeah. The legend goes that 10-year-old Jaden Smith was learning to surf and saw a plastic bottle floating next to him in the water. This affected him so much that he was compelled to start his own water company, but instead of using plastic bottles, he would use aluminum. But they did design a resealable aluminum can instead of a pop tab one, so that's slightly different. Just as a clarification, these particular companies are using aluminum bottles, but they are basically the same as aluminum cans and they have all the same properties. So we'll be using these terms interchangeably throughout the video. And perhaps the most famous of these examples is Liquid Death, which launched an entire brand around the idea of putting water into cans, but murder themed. We have, of course, made a whole video about Liquid Death if you want to get up to speed on how that company came into being, but something that all of these canned water companies have missed is that aluminum cans aren't going to save the planet. Aluminum cans were just chilling for like 70 years with relatively little fanfare until one day they were informed that they were going to save the planet. The glow up that aluminum cans have had from just like functional product to glorious life-saving technology is crazy. Now canned beverages have expanded a lot in a bunch of different categories, but we're going to be focusing on the canned water trend because it is perhaps the most absurd version of this story, and people like absurd things because it's more interesting than slightly less crazy things. These celebrities with canned waters are just the beginning because there are seemingly hundreds of companies promoting the very same idea with their own cannedness being a huge aspect of their appeal. On top of this, we have big brands like Coca-Cola and Pepsi also trying to jump on the bandwagon, launching some canned versions of their own waters. You can find Coca-Cola Smart Water and Dasani in aluminum. Pepsi announced that you will be able to find Aquafina in aluminum cans in some US markets. But this is just a toe in the can of water that we're talking about. Coca-Cola and Pepsi have not moved away from plastic. They just now offer both versions of this packaging. The second coming of aluminum water cans has definitely caught the eye of beverage giants, and they are just trying to cash in. Please don't get this twisted. These companies do not care about the planet or your well-being. They've just realized that putting beverages into aluminum cans is now popular, and they've realized they could probably make a bunch of money from it. We talk a lot about how companies are trying to manipulate you on this channel, and we talk even more about it on our podcast, which is exclusively available over on our Patreon page.
Rent is a weird one, so like we pay rent to the studio space that we're in right now per hour, but that's not really a subscription, or is it? Or is renting a subscription?
Well, and like what? We have a bunch of exclusive content there that you won't see on this channel, and you get early access to every single video before it comes out live. It is a hugely important revenue source for this channel that we're trying to grow so that we aren't as dependent on brand sponsorships, which, as you might imagine, doesn't particularly go well with this kind of content. So if you want to support what we do and you have the means, please consider checking that out through the link down in the description. So you might be able to see that this is a hype train driven mostly by the fact that cans are not plastic bottles. And as we all know today, right, everybody, on 3, plastic is bad. There we go. Basically, once they had figured out the pull tab opener in the 60s, these cans were destined to be the way that most people drank their beverages. In 1989, the stay-on tab was invented, and the aluminum cans that we know today finally hit the market, and they were a no-brainer. For the producers, aluminum cans keep drinks fresh and are easy to stack, and they're lightweight, perfect for transporting and storing. For the consumer, it's a cheap, easy way to conveniently drink your drink on the go. And for the planet, you've probably heard that aluminum cans are very recyclable. But you probably heard that from a company selling canned water or from the company that cans the water for those businesses. Now we're gonna get straight into some friggin' factoids, all right? The element of aluminum itself is infinitely recyclable. You melt that sucker down, you push it back into a form, and you got another aluminum can. It's brilliant. But to fully reap these rewards, companies would have to be using 100% recycled aluminum, not virgin aluminum. But the problem is, 100% recycled aluminum cans don't exist. In North America, beverage cans contain an average of about 68% recycled aluminum, according to the Aluminum Association. We do actually have the technology to do better though. In 2013, a company called Novelis introduced the Evercan to the beverage market. It was promoted as being made with a minimum of 90% recycled aluminum. But I'm willing to bet that you've never heard of them. And that's because the beverage industry kind of stomped that one out. None of these big beverage companies were really interested in this can, apparently because they didn't want to have to rely on a single aluminum supplier, but also because they didn't really have to. See, here's the thing. Big beverage companies don't really have much of a motive to push for innovation in the aluminum industry because the public's perception of aluminum cans is that they're super recyclable already. And so these environmentally conscious consumers are already appeased in a lot of ways. Because, listen, when you hear the statistic that almost 75% of all aluminum produced is still in use today, whereas 9% of plastics ever made have ever been recycled, that sounds pretty good, right? We've improved by 66% just by making the switch, so let's take the W and move on. But what gets recycled and what doesn't is really only one part of this conversation. Aluminum cans might mean less ocean waste, but they come with their own eco price, let's call it. The production of each can pumps out about twice as much carbon into the atmosphere as each plastic bottle. That's because we're mining stuff and processing stuff, right? The processing and refining of bauxite into raw aluminum is extremely energy intensive. According to Green Alliance, if we took half of the UK's plastic water bottles and swapped them for cans, mining the aluminum would generate 162,000 tons of toxic waste. And the double irony of this is that recycling aluminum uses 95% less energy than extracting virgin stuff, so we should be recycling more. And perhaps one of the most surprising things that we learned in the researching of this video is that aluminum cans aren't actually plastic free. When I first saw one of these viral videos exposing what's really going on inside of an aluminum can, I'll admit that I felt kind of stupid. I know a fair bit about, consumer products and how things are presented to us and these kinds of things, and I really didn't know that there was plastic on the inside of aluminum cans. I feel like I should have known that. Turns out there is a very thin plastic layer inside of every aluminum drink container to prevent the drink from coming in contact with the aluminum. Different manufacturers will use different polymers or epoxy liners, and while some research suggests that BPA-lined cans could be linked to health problems, companies like Coca-Cola maintain that the use of BPA in aluminum can liners has been used safely for more than 50 years and is an industry standard. And according to Health Canada, there is such a negligible amount of BPA in these things that it's not apparently cause for concern. And this is just a perfect representation of the nuance that so much of our conversations lack, right? Aluminum cans are the solution to our plastic waste problem, and yet they rely on plastic themselves to function. It's honestly such a tiny amount of plastic in comparison to plastic bottles, which we have also made an entire video about if you're interested in that. But it just goes to show you that just using aluminum cans instead of plastics is not going to solve our problem. One of the biggest hiccups in the proposed aluminum prophecy is that aluminum is expensive. The raw material cost for a can is 25 to 30% higher than a plastic bottle of a similar volume, which means a broad shift to aluminum would also raise the costs for drink companies. But even if we switched every company over to exclusively aluminum, it still wouldn't work because there literally isn't enough cans to go around, and we're barely keeping up as it is. Back when some beers and wines were switching from glass to cans, the world's top can maker, Ball Corp, which supplies the likes of Cokes and Pepsi, struggled to keep up. They have said that even if just 1% of a shift happened from, bottled products going into cans, would mean a surge of 24 billion more cans, and that 1% change would increase aluminum demand by about 310,000 tons. The Ball Corporation manufactures more than 50 billion cans a year, right? That's just objectively a lot of cans. And if you can recycle them, that's awesome. But of course, it's not a perfect process. There's always going to be cans that end up in the landfill. Of the 80 billion aluminum beverage cans that we consume every single year, it's estimated that only about 65% of them are recycled. And that's a huge, great number. Like I don't want to minimize that that's a great number, but it also means that we're sending 30 billion cans into the landfill. The reality is that we can't just rely on one thing to solve our problems. We want to believe that switching to aluminum cans will just save the world, right? A silver bullet solution, if you will. But of course, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's that complexity that is hard to grasp when you're just getting your groceries after a long day of work. But sadly, it's those gray areas that companies will exploit to sell you a product based on the idea of something like sustainability. Sure, yes, if you were going to buy a disposable beverage, it's better to get it in a can than in a plastic bottle. But realistically, refilling a reusable bottle will always be a better solution if you have the means to do that. As we talked about in our Liquid Death video, we're also ignoring the fact that these companies are bottling a free commodity, a literal human right, and shipping it around the world, making money off of it. Like, that's a bigger problem here. The sad reality is that if Liquid Death or any of these celebrity water brands really wanted to help save the planet, they wouldn't be canning water and then selling it back to us for a profit. They'd probably just be telling us to drink the water that comes out of our tap instead. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you want to see more content like this, remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you here every single week for another episode. I love you.